Welcome to This Team is Killing Us, a podcast about what the Carolina Panthers do to good people. She is Lauren Brownlow. I am Demetri and Lauren, I guess what is killing me today is the waiting, because it really did seem like at the beginning of this week, we were just flooded with a combination of what you get like all along in the lead up to the draft, right? A lot of speculation stuff. But yesterday seemed to be, and we're recording this on the 16th, so the 15th, seemed to be the day that everybody put out their article that basically said, I don't think Dan Morgan even knows what he wants to do with the 8th pick in the draft.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I believe that. In fact,
Right.
I'm reasonably confident that I don't. At least, and certainly I don't want to.
Right.
I realize some things will depend, and there is some variability, like we've talked about that, about like where certain picks will fall and whatever. But that's literally what the big board is for, you know. It's just...
Yeah, it's so funny. I watched a YouTube video of the Chargers GM watching and reviewing the movie Draft Day, and the thing that he like
I've never
immediately.
Seen that.
You haven't? Oh, Lord, we need to do a watch along for people.
I know. I was going to suggest that to you, actually, because I know it's notorious. It's supposed to be terrible. So.
It's the most like, oh, the person that wrote this has never seen football before movie
right.
I think I've ever seen in my life. But what I was going to say, when I was going to bring that up, is he dismissed it almost off the jump because the draft board was too small. Every draft board they showed had one person at one position in each round. And he was like, yeah, this is just so unlike the way a GM goes through the draft process. I can't take anything they do seriously in this movie. And that's a part of what Dan is probably going through right now. I would imagine he knows, like, you cannot not go, if you're staying at 8, you cannot do anything other than edge rusher, right? Like, it is so obvious that is the necessary move in a top 10 slot. But I would guess that you got to keep an open mind for who might come up. You got to keep an open mind about what you've heard that might start to now feel like a little bit smoke screeny. I don't buy that he doesn't know what he wants to do. I do buy that probably more than in years past, just because of the way talent is sort of organized in this draft, that you really have to have a plan A, a plan B, and probably a plan C, D, and E at this point.
Yeah, and look, I think, like, if you're still on the board at 8 and, you know, somebody that you think is a really special player but you didn't expect to be there is there, as long as it's not quarterback or tight end for me. So it's me talking. I have no problem with you draft. Like, if a Travis Hunter is still there at 8, you have to draft Travis Hunter, you know?
For sure.
Like, you know, but like otherwise, yes, I agree. Like, if it falls how it's expected to, I think they have to go edge rush. That's just my, you know, I've seen a lot of wide receiver talk. I just I'm not buying it personally. Ted McMillan, I could see it if he falls that far, but that's not necessarily expected to happen either, right? So, like, at that point, you know, and even Travis can do some of that. That's not the primary position he'd play, but they need cornerbacks too. So 2 for 1. You know, it's like
I think
that's not going to happen. He's not falling that far. So.
I would certainly hope not. I do wonder. I mean, I hope so, because I think
I was going to say, I was like, disagree.
I think he is the single most valuable player in this draft. Even if I think Abdul Carter is better at his position than Hunter is at his, I think you could do so much more with Hunter than you can with anybody else for exactly what you talked about. Like, they are going to line him up at receiver. Whoever drafts him is going to line him up at receivers, at least some. Maybe not as much as he played at Colorado. But I do wonder if Travis Hunter might fall into the same category, I guess, of criticism that we've Jalen Walker, where if you can do two things, are you really any one specific thing in a highly specialized league? I think in both cases, like, I would welcome the versatility.
I watched him. He is that good at both things. And especially at quarterback. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? Like, you're talking about 2 of the top 10 talents in the draft. Like, you welcome the versatility. It's not like this is a dude that can block, and we'll just plug him wherever we
I
need
don't
to
know.
on the
Does he
offensive
have
line.
too many skills?
Right.
Like, this is how we know the draft process takes too long. Like, calm down.
Dan Morgan talked to some Panthers media assembled yesterday about what his plans were and what he was thinking going into the draft. Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer, I saw on Twitter, respond to somebody that said they walked out very much believing that Dan Morgan was telling everybody that Jalen Walker was going to be a Panther by saying that he walked out thinking it was pretty clear there is no the guy for the Panthers this year.
And so, ergo, like, default, like, I think it's going to be Jalen Walker too. Like, I would be pretty surprised if it's not, to be honest.
Yeah. Dan Morgan did reiterate the team's willingness to trade down. He said that in the wake of the news about the Saints probably being without Derek Carr this year, he did not immediately hear from anybody about trading up to get ahead of them to take Shedeur Sanders in the event that now quarterback becomes a bigger priority for the Saints. The only thing I think you could say for sure coming out of that media availability is I thought he parroted word for word almost what Dave Canales told Kay Adams about the wide receiving core. I would dismiss Ted McMillan as a possibility at this point. I just don't see, given everything they're saying, I don't see how they could be taking McMillan seriously as an option at 8.
Yeah, I get that. That's just, again, some of it is like Brownlow GM.
Sure.
God, no one wants that, least of all me. But in my mind, look, I personally, my thing is just like, if they were going to go that route, that's the person, the only one in that range that I would be like, yes, great.
Yeah.
If they were going to take him at 8, but yeah, I mean, I told you, and I think you and I both feel this way for the most part. Like, could they use one more like great wide receiver? Like, of course they could, but like, I still think they're in far better shape than they've been in a while at that position,
sure.
And so I think like there's not nearly as much urgency there, and I can see why like that's not high on their priority list.
I mean, so to me, if you're taking an offensive weapon right there, I am kind of coming around on Tyler Warren, even though, for the most part, that is more about like, help me remember here. Was it Jimmy Graham? I don't know if you've heard. He used to play basketball. Was he the one that when maybe it's back when he was with the Seahawks, they wanted to franchise tag him and he got a little bit angry about it because like he would be judged on other tight end contracts and like, you're mostly using me as a wide receiver. Wasn't that Jimmy Graham that sort of took that stand and that would led to the trade to New Orleans?
Wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. I'm not 100% though.
Anyway, the reason I'm coming around on Warren, even though, let me be very clear, I don't want an offensive player at 8, is I think that's probably going to be Tyler Warren's career. And I think he is very much that Rob Gronkowski type. I think he's just a separated at his position from so many others in a way none of the wide receivers are. But I still think they do need a receiving weapon, another receiving weapon. You know me, though, Lauren. Like I've been saying, I would rather them add a veteran. I don't think they need to be developing another guy while they're developing 2 of their top 3 targets right now still.
Yeah, and look, I'm very much a JT Sanders stan. Like I am all in his camp. I'm not saying like he's as good. That's not what I'm saying. I don't know that, but I think he has a lot of upside. And I just really like what he could potentially be capable of doing. And I'm a believer. And so like, for me, I get the impulse to do that. But at the same time, like I just like him at tight end quite a bit. And then I don't know. I think like I'm trying to think of the analogy. I was trying to workshop it in my head earlier. And I was like, oh, this is a tricky one. Cause it's like, you have 2 kids.
Yeah.
If one of your kids is like in worse shape than the other, but your other kid could really use like something little, you're not going to necessarily prioritize giving the little thing that your kid needs as opposed to your kid that's in dire need. And that's kind of how I look at the offense and the defense at this point. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah, great. You could use a wide receiver. Meanwhile, this house is on fire. So that needs to be
right.
Like,
And that's the thing, right? Like, because of the amount of needs on the offense, like, if you're staying in the top 10 edge rusher, we both agree is where you go. That doesn't mean that a first round, like, you do not also have a first round level of need in the secondary as well. Like, it does feel
Yeah,
like
100%.
there is so much to get to right now. I want to circle back on that idea that right now the Panthers are in a very precarious situation, because I don't know if I am ready to read in what some people have read into Deion Sanders' comments about the Saints and what that might mean for Shedeur. Deion Sanders says that he loves the city, he loves the people, he loves the team, and did not expand on it. That could mean any of a million different things. But now suddenly, with them sitting at 9, number 8 becomes a really valuable pick for anybody that might need a quarterback, namely the Steelers, sitting at 21. And I think that probably is motivating why Dan Morgan, more than, the flexibility, that's motivating why he has to answer these questions about trading back right now.
This is the way my brain works, probably, at least in part. But if there's an opportunity to fuck the Saints, please.
So
I would love to prioritize that. If there's a way that we can screw them over somehow, whether it's making them give up too much if they want to get there, or making sure somebody else gets in their place for way less, I'm here for all possibilities, honestly, at this point.
I actually had this thought today before we started recording. You could not only screw with the Saints here, but you could also screw with the Buccaneers a little bit, because they desperately need talent at linebacker. If you could work out a way where you could get the Saints to overpay for the certainty of nobody getting in front of them to take Shedeur, and you're still in position to take Jalen Walker, like, you have just shot an arrow into the heart of the two other franchises in this division that don't have the history of shooting themselves in the foot. Like, the Falcons will take care of themselves down the line.
I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know. All four of us have plenty of history with self-sabotage, all four franchises to some degree. But yeah, no, I mean, and honestly, the Saints have made moves just to mess with them, literally just to sabotage the Panthers. That has happened. Yeah. And it with them basically confirming that after the fact. So I'm here for any and all. The Bucks, if they get hurt, sorry, didn't mean to, but I mean, I guess you do mean to if you're trying to enhance your chances in the division or whatever.
Right.
But at the same time, for me, it's all about let's just if we can give it to them, that'd be great. I would love it.
Would you do business with a team in the division, whether that's the Saints or the Buccaneers or the Falcons, for something maybe we're not thinking of off the top of our head?
I mean, you probably have to, right? It's not like they never do business with one another, but I'm telling you, I'm going out of my way, especially if they're desperate. I'm screwing you worse.
Right.
I'm demanding more. You don't want to give it to me, then go away. Bye. I'm asking for something completely unreasonable from you.
Yeah, I think there is a different math that is done when it's draft picks and not players. I can't remember either. I know the Giants traded the pick to, it was either the pick to the Eagles that became Devontae Smith or the pick to the Cowboys that became Micah Parsons. One of those way more significant than the other, but you can't tell me the Giants would not love to have one of those two guys, as opposed to, I think that's the year they drafted Kadarius Toney, who came into the league and immediately shit the bed. All right, so let me ask you a question. As a fan, thinking about all the possibilities that could be, right? We're in the Schrödinger's cat stage, where until a draft pick is made, this could be anything. Do you want, all right, first of all, divorce the Lauren of it all from this. I know you are rooting for Aaron Rodgers to stay unsigned forever, but the longer that the Steelers go without a quarterback on the roster, a capable starting quarterback on the roster, it does seem like the more valuable the 8th pick is here.
I don't know. I guess I am rooting for him to be unsigned. And also I don't see Mike Tomlin being okay with that. I just really don't. I don't care what he says in public. I don't see that being something that he would ever accept.
I am starting to, and I've only been thinking about this because of the likelihood that the Steelers and Panthers will be doing business in some way here.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of doubt, this is not just Mike Tomlin, this is the organization top to bottom. I kind of doubt that they have any real culture anymore. I think that you look at.
But Tomlin has a certain culture, I would argue, like in terms of what he values, right?
So, yes, but. And we probably pay more attention because of Tomlin's personality. But, like, how many times has that dude ended up on Instagram because his best players are just acting like he has no authority over them? Like, I think that things have gotten so desperate at this point in Pittsburgh because the fan base has not realized there's nothing special about them anymore, that I just don't think there is anything going in the Steelers' direction that is any different than anybody else in the league. I thought about this yesterday while I was riding my bike. I think the Steelers, by hanging on to Tomlin for so long, I think that Tomlin has sort of lost his magic with the Steelers. And I think the Steelers have kind of ruined Mike Tomlin's ability to move on at this point because of how visible,
like they're intertwined. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also like just how because of when the quote unquote magic was gone, they valued never having a losing season for so long that we saw. And granted, some of these people are just fucking nuts, but we saw Antonio Brown, we saw Ben Roethlisberger, we saw George Pickens. We've seen so many dudes basically in the locker room acting like Mike Tomlin can't do anything to me. I'm too important. I would not want to hire the dude as a head coach right now, irregardless of how good of a coach I know he is.
Yeah, I kind of get that. At the same time, like, we've seen it a million times. Like, sometimes guys just, and teams too, like, it's sometimes very mutually beneficial for fresh starts to be had for both sides. Like, we've seen both sides flourish after things like that. It's like an amicable divorce or whatever, you know, it's just, and sometimes it just gets, like you said, it gets stale. It gets to be too much. And, you know, I would be, depending on the situation, I don't think it's for everybody, but like, depending on the franchise's situation, I think he would be, you know, more than capable, or maybe he's just like, I'm going to finish it out here and just do my best. But I don't know. It seems like it's like taking pieces of his soul away.
It really, I mean, look, who could blame him if his attitude at this point was all money spins? So I'll keep taking the money and not have to relocate.
Literally none of us, because I think most of us probably feel the same way in various aspects of our own lives. It's like, a job, great, not going to lose that one.
Right.
I'm good. I'll camp out here.
So
he has way more money than we do, but whatever.
Yeah, and will forever and ever. So it's really important to say this before we wrap up on the Shedeur Sanders thing. We're sitting here analyzing what the Panthers could do to the Steelers because of what the Steelers may need and what the value of the Panthers pick. This could all be irrelevant. I don't dismiss the possibility that the Giants take Shedeur at 3, and then it's just a very boring draft from there on out.
That just, I don't know why. I've listened to Bomani Jones so long now that I can't help but think like, yeah, but they don't take black quarterbacks. That was my immediate thought of like, they don't like black quarterbacks there. But maybe this is their way of coming on being like, no, we're different now. Look, we're drafting one.
Listen,
and everything.
I think as quarterback needy as they are right now.
Yeah.
And this class being what it is, like, brother, you better get comfortable with a black quarterback because the only 2 or maybe 3 that might be worth a damn are all black in this class. I thought about this yesterday as I was starting to put the rundown together. I think this was at Bleacher Report. Someone did a hot seat ranking for all of the GMs, and they put Dan Morgan at a 5. And they put Dan at a 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10.
Oh, I thought you meant like 5th. I was like,
no. They rated Dan Morgan a 5 out of 10. And the columns seem to be written from the standpoint of, yes, the wins have not been there, but this is a different David Tepper. He wants things to work out with Bryce Young. He understands how much needs to be put in place around Bryce Young.
Yeah.
I think both you and I would agree that Dave Tepper has behaved differently in 2024 and 2025 than he did in 2023.
Well, we don't know that. All we know is we don't hear from him anymore.
Well,
so in that way, yes.
That's what I mean by he's behaved differently.
Right.
I don't know that I believe that's a new David Tepper. Like, if let's say they go out in this draft, top 10 pick, and maybe they take Walker and Walker ends up injured and misses the whole season, or they miss on Walker, like someone gets Walker before them and they get somebody that is just not prepared to be a starter on day one. I'm not so sure that Dan Morgan is not on a hot seat, not because he deserves it, but because I don't think I have faith that we really have a new Dave Tepper at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Because like, honestly, I don't think, again, I think that people underestimate how much you can positively change your perception if you're being perceived badly by just shutting the fuck up.
Right.
Literally, like just stop talking to people.
Yeah.
You know how this thing where like everyone thinks you're the worst? It's because of the stuff you say. So maybe shut up and don't do that. And like literally people are like, oh, David Tepper, chill behind the scenes. And it's like, he might not be. He might still be overbearing AF. And we just don't know that because because he's not talking as much. But either way, like, you know, I mean, look, I've had one big issue with any pick that Dan's made, and that was the Jonathan Brooks one, but you didn't have as much of an issue with it as I did. But that was, you know, we've been over that a million times. Even then, I understood at least the rationale behind it, and I appreciated the sort of boldness of like, this is a guy we really like, and he's here, and we want him, and that's it. Yeah. And I appreciated that. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see it because like he's notoriously impatient. We know that about Tepper. Right. And but
not
at the same time,
notoriously impatient. This also is not like the defense needs so much work. The offense is not completely fixed yet. Like he's notoriously impatient, and it's not like this team has made gigantic strides away from where they were in 2023. I mean, just if you just want to boil it down to wins and losses, you know, we celebrated a 5-12 season this year as improvement. Like someone like Dave Tepper, I don't know that he does that for a second season or a third.
Yeah,
season.
It's not a gigantic stride, but I think it's also the first like positive forward momentum we've seen from this team in a while.
I totally agree with you. I'm not I'm not saying we should not celebrate, especially what we saw at the end of last year. I'm trying to put myself in the role of Dave Tepper's therapist here.
Well, the thing is too, like there's a lot to be said for like learning from failure. I mean, I hate, you know, and I hate to say that, but it's like, and also like the value of being shamed in public. And David Tepper has taken a beating for like being, I actually don't think he was that impatient with the Matt Rule thing, but there are other things too. Where and it's like, oh wow, you can't work for him, he's crazy, he'll fire you in 2 seconds, he'll be impatient that you're not winning even though he's not helping, you know, set the conditions to be a winning franchise and blah blah blah, right? And I think like I do think I would like to think not everyone learns from experience. I've seen that plenty, but I would like to think that maybe he is just deciding like, okay, you know what? People want me to let this play out. I'm going to let this play out more. And I'm just going to like let's see how this goes before I make a judgment, because the rebuild that is needed here is massive. We've talked about Canales and having patience with him because of like everything that has to change. But the bigger rebuild, when you're actually talking about rebuild, comes from Dan Morgan's job because like the defense is in shambles. It was in shambles, you know, and it became even worse because of just like a lot of combination of things, because he wanted to fix the offense first, which he did. It's not, like you said, it's not completely fixed, but it's better. The defense is in a situation, I would say even still right now, where you will lose more games than you win strictly because of that, even if you have the best offense in the league. Like that is where this defense is right now. You have the best offense in the league, you're still losing. And that's why when people are like, unlike, the offense still needs X, I'm like, I don't give a shit. Because right now,
it's not unlike what we've known of the Tar Heels for the last few years. Like they could score 40 and it won't matter. Like that would be kind of where the Panthers are before the draft at this point. I wonder, as much as you and I celebrate getting to 5 and the forward momentum and that there is reason for hope going into 2025, nobody knows this except for David Tepper for sure. I would guess Nicole probably knows. His wife, maybe Dan Morgan knows. But what do you think his expectation is of 2025? Like, to me, if they're still a losing team, but it's 7-10 and they put together a bunch of losses like the ones to the Chiefs and the Eagles, I'm okay with that. I don't know that Dave Tepper is, though.
I think he might be, because I think like there's nothing like really sucking, like just really bottoming out.
Yeah.
To make you have perspective. I mean, I've seen that some in my own life. It's like,
sure.
Like when you've been at your worst or whatever, all of a sudden routine things that used to just feel like nothing, all of a sudden you're like, oh, cool, I can do that now. Like, great. Like, like, and so I wonder if that, has given him a little bit of perspective and a little bit of understanding of like, you can't just snap your fingers and be right back where you want to be. And he certainly hurt. Like, I think the media in this way has been helpful when it comes to the Panthers, of like really reinforcing that on the broadcast and everything else of like, hey, this is going to take a lot of time and patience. And they've said that word. I mean, we've seen the word being said. And I think what he needs to understand, and I would hope that he does, is that like we all want to see collectively as the fans is like, just show me, like you just said, just show me steady improvement. And if that looks like 7 wins, it looks like 7 wins. But because the defense, like you said, the defense isn't going to be fixed in a year. I don't even think it's going to be as fixed as the offense, I think, ended up being by the end of the year. You know what I mean? Like with Bryce playing at his best and some of those wide receivers really rounding into form and everything else, and and certainly Chuba and all that. So I think like, it's not just going to be like immediately they're back in a playoff race, and like 7 wins to win 12 games in the last 2 years after what's happened in the 5 or so years before that would feel like a dream, to be honest, So I think, I don't know. I think he'd be okay with it. It would depend on how it plays out though, too.
Yeah. So there's no part of you that worries that by this time next year, we are talking about another future mortgaging trade, not to replace Bryce necessarily, but even if that's like, to replace Icky at left tackle, or if that's to add another major piece to defense.
Either way, I think this is a big year for Icky. Yeah. Really.
Well, let's pivot to that, because it goes into the last thing I wanted to talk about right now, which is the way the Panthers approach their offensive needs in this draft. And I started thinking about this because I don't know if you saw Ben Solak's breakdown on ESPN of what he made basically like a menu for what everyone should be thinking going into the draft. And he said for the Panthers, it's edge rusher in round 1, get a starting safety. And other than that, add picks anytime you have the opportunity to add picks. Nothing about the offensive needs in there at all. But then you still hear a lot about wide receiver. I saw Field Yates on ESPN yesterday talking about the fact that like there are 3 dudes on the offensive line whose contracts are up at the end of the season. So you've got to believe offensive line is some sort of need. But we know what the defense is at the end of the day. So how early, realistically, do you expect this team to focus on any one of those offensive needs? Because if they want someone that's going to make an impact as a pass catcher, whether that's a tight end or a wide receiver, you would have to think they're going to do that in the first 3 rounds. And I don't think that's the smartest move.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. You know how I feel. Like for me, I want all of the focus to be on the defense. Like literally, I just because again, that house is on fire, and the other house, like, I don't know, there's a bush burning outside,
right?
Or something. It's like no, but this one's actually on fire. Please put the fire hoses over there, because that one needs your immediate attention. And so, like, I just think there's a lot to do on that side of the ball. I like what he did in free agency, and it seemed like they did really prioritize that, both in terms of like long-term contracts and whatever. But there are a lot of deals that are going to be up after next year. And so it'll be interesting, whether it's because they re-signed guys to like a 1-year deal or whatever, or because contracts are just running out. And so, they'll have a lot of money that they'll need to spend potentially. And how does that impact like a continued rebuild on the defensive side too?
Right.
I mean, those are all things to think about. And so do you want to have a younger guy in there that would cost you a little less, but has some talent from the draft? Or, then you don't have to worry as much about signing to a huge contract and plays well for you and can start? Or do you want to have, do you want to have a lot of the same defensive problems that you
Yeah.
that you had before? You don't want to go backwards on that side of the ball. I'll say that much. Like, that is the biggest thing. I mean, I can't imagine going backwards unless you somehow go through a wormhole where you end up being the best defense in the world magically, because there's really nowhere to go but not backwards.
No, I mean, going backwards, I think on either side of the ball right now is,
Yes,
we get back to that same argument about Dave Tepper. How much patience does he really have to fix this thing? But,
well, I think, like, for me, it's like by the end of the year, it's like, is the offense good enough to win games on paper, right? By itself, is the offense good enough to win games against most of the teams in the league on a given day, right?
Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I think they could certainly hang with anybody. I think they proved. I mean,
Yeah.
look, they hung with the 2 Super Bowl teams until the very last play.
Yes, and they sometimes, did they play well every week offensively? Not necessarily, but they did more than they didn't by the end of the year, and that was like, okay, cool, we're cooking with something here. But is the defense good enough to win literally any game against an NFL football team? No.
Maybe not, right?
So, and that matters a lot, because you can score as many points as you want, but you got to be able to make stops, and they have not shown even the remotest capability to do that on a consistent basis. So, like, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at with that. It's like, you do have to, that's the biggest area this year. And you have to just keep that top of mind, and you have to make sure that you're doing all you can to, like, show any, like, we're thirsty for any improvement. That's why by the end of the year, you almost felt like the Panthers had, like, the 99 Rams offense. That was how it felt in comparison, didn't it?
Right. It certainly did. I mean, that's
like, wow, this is an air raid, like, flying high over here.
Well, that's why we all felt as good as we did about Bryce Young's, turnaround touchdown moment. I want to talk about the offensive line real quick, because I guess I just did not think about ever how many contracts are coming up, because I certainly have looked at the draft and thought this team should be adding at least one offensive lineman in this draft. And I've always looked at it as a day 3 pick, right? Like, you and I have talked before.
I would agree with that. I think that seems reasonable.
Like, you and I have talked before about the Panthers' history of really falling in love. Yeah. Well, so here's what I was going to say. You and I have talked before about the Panthers' history of really falling in love with South Carolina prospects. And there's not a long history of them falling for NC State guys or falling for UNC guys. And as much as we have been up and down on Icky, I'm sorry, when I say Panthers history, I'm talking specifically about the Tepper era. As much as we are up and down on Icky, I do look at Anthony Belton as a guy that, like, if you're looking at day 3, that's a great type of prospect that you could use as depth for a couple of years before you even have to decide what you have in him. Same with Logan Brown out of Kansas. And that is always the way I viewed the offensive line needs in this draft. And maybe in the overly obvious need to fix the defense, maybe we haven't thought enough long-term about what the needs of this team are.
Well, here's the thing. You do, and that's why I could never be a GM, because there's way too much stuff you have to remember at all times and be aware of. Because it's like you're plugging a leak over here, and then all of a sudden there's one over, and you're like, oh no, I can't, And I think, like, you do always have to be aware of, like, okay, what do these contracts look like? When are they going to run out? What does that mean going forward? Like, do we need to replace? Are we looking at replace with this guy, or, like, is that what we're thinking, or are we not sure yet? Or are we looking at, you always have to be thinking about that. What's it going to cost to keep him? Is it worth it? Like, all of those things have to be factoring in at all times, right? So, I mean, when I say prioritize defense, I don't necessarily mean, like, draft every player defensively. Like, it's just more like the top picks. I would like to be focused on the areas of need there, because there's lots of need on the defense. And so I would rather your high end picks be really, really good players that address that. That's how I would feel. But like you said, later rounds, like the Panthers have had numerous starters come out of those later round picks. And I would rather get offensive linemen, especially, I would rather get in those later rounds, frankly, than, like, not that you can't get a good undrafted free agent, but, like, I would rather get some of those guys late and then like have to rely on like, oh, let's hope that this undrafted free agent that we really like, we can sign him. I would much rather them pick a guy that they really like a lot and get him in there, because chances are, if they've done their scouting well enough, and for the most part, the offensive linemen they've brought in the last few years have been good. Like there's nobody that I can say has been like a trash can, as opposed to like some of the O-lines Cam had in the past. Cam Newton had. Like,
I mean, look, I think it's fair to say the 2023 offensive line was pretty bad, but they allocated money. They spent wisely. You and I both kind of raised our eyebrows at how much they invested in guards, but that seemed to be the right move for them.
Yes, it did.
So I do have faith that Morgan knows what he's doing. I cannot remember the name of the cap guy for the Panthers, but he's a guy that when he got hired, I don't know if you remember this, Ross Tucker from NFL Network and CBS texted me raving about this guy, that he's someone that has been on Ross's podcast before. And he's like, this is a really smart guy. This is a dude that understands, not just the numbers today, but understands what the numbers today mean for tomorrow. So I believe they're in a good position.
So does that mean like Dan is more like in charge of the talent itself, whereas this guy maybe manages more of like this guy's contract's running out at X and like whatever?
Yeah. I think when you and I talk about the free agent signing show how pretend money is, I think this
That's what I was going to say. I was like, what do you need a cap guy for? What's the cap?
I think this other guy knows exactly how pretend money is and for just how long.
That's what you need. You got it. Yeah. I mean, listen, we all need a money guy. Tell you that right now. We all need that.
It's a shame we do not have a sponsor, because that would be the perfect place to transition to. And in these uncertain times. Right. All right. So next week, we usually put the show out on Thursday. Here's what I'm thinking, Lauren. On Thursday, I'll just put out a mock draft on Thursday. Let's you and I wait to record Monday, looking back on everything that the Panthers did at the draft. I don't know that putting out a show the day of the draft makes a ton of sense for us.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there's not much else left to say that we haven't already said.
It feels like we've done the same show 3 weeks in a row now, because we're in this spinning our wheels phase.
And I was going to say, like, I actually reinvigorated myself a little bit in the column space this week for OG fans, where I drafted Panthers drafts. And I think next week I might draft their worst drafts.
Oh, very good.
I don't know if I do that in reverse order or...
Where I was thinking about this, I knew it was not going to show up in your draft of great drafts, but where would you put 2016, which was the most Gettleman of drafts, where he runs off Josh Norman, and there's this glaring need at corner. There's also a glaring need at receiver based on what we saw in the Super Bowl, and instead he goes defensive tackle with that dude out of Louisiana Tech.
Let me tell you. Oh God, yeah. The beautiful that'll be on there somewhere in the worst. That I did notice that one. I'm like, oh Jesus, that was bad. And the thing is, I didn't even bother to look up context for my worst drafts or for my best drafts. I probably should for worst, because that does play a role,
Yeah.
But if I remembered the context, I would include it. But like, I didn't even bother to look it up, because to me, it's like, let me just look at like, how good were you for either the Panthers or someone else,
Yeah. I don't think positive needs as much context as negative does, right?
I would agree. I agree with that completely. But 2016 is for sure, absolutely. 2009 as well. They went Everett Brown with their first pick in the second round. Just, there's been some truly awful ones over the years. Cam Newton's draft is awful, except for Cam Newton.
It was 10, right? Wasn't 10 the year they drafted both Clausen and Edwards?
Oh, that's number one. Sorry, spoiler alert. I will be stunned if, like, in my parsing of this, that anything beats that. Because I mean, it is. I even like looked through it as I'm like, okay, well, let me look at like all the picks. Maybe it's not. Oh God, it's horrific. It is just from top to bottom. It's like a drunk person did it. Because remember, it's like Armonte Edwards, Jimmy Clausen, Brandon LaFell. If that's your best pick, or no, Greg Hardy's your best pick, I think. Which
I guess so. And Greg Hardy's time here was notable.
Greg Hardy or David Geddes, maybe Eric Norwood. He wasn't terrible. But
Yeah, LaFell was one of those guys that every now and then he'd have a game where you're like,
Yes.
oh, I see what they saw in him. And then, 9 weeks later, he'd have another one of those games.
they had 10 draft picks that year, and the vast 10, Demetri,
Yeah.
10 of them, the vast majority, they might as well have just said, no, thank you. We won't pick them.